Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Nice to see you again. My name is Maurizio Benazzo.
My name is Aya Benazzo. We are the filmmakers, the film directors, or the film listeners. Better said, I don't like the word directors.
Yeah, it feels powerful.
In the circle of life. And this is our second day. And we're delighted to expand on some of the themes that we touched lightly in the film with our guests today.
Yeah, and it's so beautiful to see familiar faces. So beautiful that you are back. Such a joy and an honor. Thank you to be back in our virtual living room with us. It's a joy. Thank you. So, sorry, I interrupt. I got excited. I want to introduce you with Judy and Carly, our guests for this first hour. I'm going to read a very brief intro and very brief bio, and then we can go straight into the conversation because that would be super excited to have you. So let me start. Judy Atkinson is an emeritus professor and Indigenous scholar whose groundbreaking work addresses trauma, healing, and the impact of colonization. She's the founder of We Ali. She's recognized internationally and by the Order of Australia.
Thank you, Judy.
Judy, for
welcome. And thank you for opening your home to us, to film, and to providing that space for deep conversations that now are transmitted through the film. So much gratitude.
Thank you. And then we have Carly. Carly Atkinson is a Bunjalung and Imam scholar and CEO of We Ali. She's internationally recognized for her leadership in Indigenous trauma healing and culturally informed practice. Carly, as well, thank you so much for being with us. It's beautiful to see you again. Thank you.
And to see 3 generations women healing. I mean, your daughter is well on the same path as you,
as you see in the film.
Judy. So beautiful. Intergenerational trauma, but also intergenerational healing and resilience and wisdom passed down. And just for our audience, we'll start with some questions with Judy and Carly, and then we invite you to also bring your own questions for them. So you can either put them in the Q&A box, or you can raise your hand as well. Just Judy, to begin perhaps with you, can you speak to what was the vision behind We Ali, you founding the organization, and what led you to that? What need did you see that was not addressed through other ways of healing?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. I was employed working in Queensland, particularly in Cape York, and I was starting to hear stories that had never been recorded. I went to government, and government were not interested. The stories were of the colonisation of those places where I was working and the violence that happened with the guns. But I heard more than that. I also heard of rape of women and children. I'm being really clear when I say this. And I had to go away for a while, so I came back to where my husband was down near Gympie, and went out to where we live. And I was sitting there thinking, what the hell do I do with this? What do I do with my life? And and next thing, the plane came flying over, dropped off at the airport, and the minister came to see me and said, you can't just walk out on this. And this was Bob Catter, by the way. You can't just walk out on this. You've got to keep working on this now. So I went back to work, trying to understand what were the stories that I was hearing in each of the communities. I was responsible for the Aboriginal communities across Australia at that time, under both the state and federal government. And I then started to sit with the stories more deeply and see the generational impacts of the colonisation. That was the massacres, the violence, the stuff that happened on them through this colonising process. And I started to think deeply about that more. And I started to run workshops, which I was asking everybody, what do we do about healing? How do we heal this great trauma? So the word healing came in, and then somebody said to me, oh, you're doing Wee Lee. And I thought, what the hell is Wee Lee?
Right.
Wee Lee. And they said, it's fire and water. We have to go into the fire. We have to feel it, the rage, the anger, the depth of, in that fire of all the pain, all the stories that I was holding, and the water, the grief. And I'm going to cry. And when you get to the grief, when you get to that deep, deep sense of the woundedness inside and the grief of it, then we will enter the healing. So really, those two words came from fire and water, anger and grief. And the grief allows us in Aboriginal cultural processes, it was the communities coming together to heal what had happened in the communities. So that's how we at least started. I had no idea what I was doing. I would invite people to come to workshops, and I would go into prisons and work. I was doing this, and I was doing it myself at the time. I wasn't looking at government. I didn't want to be with government. And I realized that the more that we opened the stories of that distress, we moved into the strength of who we were as a people. We were taking our power back. And so that was the beginning of it all. And including my husband, he became the cook in the workshops we were doing. He would be in the kitchen. And every so often we'd have this big explosion outside, and he'd come out and he'd say, stop them. They can't do this. And then I remember one night, he was English. He grew up in an English public boarding school, went through horrendous abuses at school. And then one night he just blurted out his own story as well. So he became totally committed to the work that we were doing. And I'm going to finish by, you can ask me further questions. There's some hands raised. But then now WeAlee is a formal registered organisation, and Carly and her partner Dave and a whole lot of other people are just out there doing this work. There's other names for it, but we, fire, water, anger and grief. Let's move from the anger into the grief, and we start to heal in the grieving ceremonies that we need to participate in.
So beautiful. Beautiful. It captures everything. The name just speaks to it, to the power of the process. And before I move to Carly, maybe Judy, you can speak to the cultural aspect of your work. Like, why is it important that it's culturally integrated and that culture is brought into the healing process? And was that something that you realized was missing from Western approaches to healing trauma and understanding trauma? Yeah.
Well, in fact, the colonising impacts in Australia was to get rid of the culture. They said the culture was bad, no good, but the culture was always there, embedded. So the depth of going back into what I call deep culture, not superficial culture, but the deep culture of who we were as a people. And in Aboriginal cultures across Australia, every half and full moon, communities came together wherever they were, and they ceremonized, they ritualized, they embodied, and they danced, and they told the stories of their strength. But also, once colonization happened, they also started to unpack the stories of those colonizing impacts, the massacres that happened. So people were going back to trying to heal from the colonizing impacts. Now, let me be very clear. If you look at Australian history, and I've done that at many different levels, including my own PhD, and Kelly has too, I had to enter those places where the massacres happened. And as you walked on the country, you would feel that energy of what had happened. But it wasn't just on the country. It was embodied within the generations of people who had been through that. And they had been told over and over again that their culture was nothing. They were nothing. They were no good. They were just blackfellas. But in the culture itself, with the ceremonial processes on a fortnightly basis, half and full moon, of coming together, of dancing and in ritual and in story, of healing what had ever happened in the communities for them to come together. Now they had a real reason for doing those ceremonies because the colonizers had been through on their horseback, they had raped, they had pillaged, they had shot, they had killed. And there was a real need in this country, and there still is, to do the healing, a return to wholeness. That is critical for us as human beings to start to live together. Now, I'll just finish by saying that's just not an Australian story. This is a universal story across the whole world of people who've been harmed coming to another country. And I'll just say one thing. On the first fleet that came into Sydney Cove, there was a 9-year-old boy. He was a convict, and he was sentenced to life in Australia as a 9-year-old boy. He was on the convict first fleet because he had been orphaned in London. And he stole a slice of bread because he was living on the streets of London. He stole a slice of bread to survive. They decided he was a bad person, so they sent him out to Australia. I mean, there were a lot of other stories that came in, on the 7 ships that came in the first fleet to transfer the convicts to Australia. Transfer that thinking to the whole world, and you'll understand how important the work you're doing is. I'll just stop there. I'm sure Kelly's got some stuff to say too.
Right. Well, maybe, Carly, you can carry what Judy just shared. And so trauma is, as we know, as you both have articulated, is multi-generational, is intergenerational, and often is internalized and perpetuated. From your experience, many communities, not just in Australia, everywhere we visited, are still struggling with those cycles and with the internalized harm. What active steps a community can take on this healing journey to teach young men, young women, different ways of being and walking with one another?
Such a good question. And I hope through watching this film and sitting in the messages of this film that some of the truth telling, because that's actually the point, the truth telling needs to come out. Once we can start talking about the harm that has been done and the harm then that we cause on others, then we can start that intergenerational healing journey. I mean, one of the hardest conversations for our community is not just about the violence on others. It's actually the harm done to us, but also the harm that turns inwards. Yeah. So that internalized harm doesn't begin in our culture. It begins, I guess, when love is interrupted and when safety is broken and when identity is attacked and when dignity is stripped away. So, as I said, over time, that harm can start to live inside people, and that shows up as shame, as anger turned sideways, as self-blame, as hurting the ones closest to us, as numbing. It can turn up as silence. And what I see a lot too, it turns up as believing we are less than. And it's not because we are harmful people, yeah? It's because we've lived inside harmful systems. And, colonization didn't just take our land. It taught people to doubt themselves. It taught people to turn against essentially their own reflection. And when that happens across generations, pain doesn't disappear. It really just changes shape, I guess. And so when we speak about community violence, family violence, lateral violence, sexual violence, self-harm, addiction, we're actually not speaking about moral failure. We're speaking about unheld grief. So healing begins when we stop asking what's wrong with our people and really starts asking what happened to our people. And this film starts to talk about that. And healing begins when we create the spaces. And I think this is a space where we're doing that, where shame can breathe, I guess, and where, the anger can be understood, where the grief can be witnessed, and where the accountability this is really important, where the accountability can exist alongside compassion. And in WeArly, we don't heal wounding or harm or violence by punishment alone. We heal it through reconnection and through talking and through that truth telling and through reconnection with our bodies and our stories, as Mum's talking about, and importantly, reconnecting to the country and the culture and each other, because this harm really fractures our relationships, and healing restores that. So when community remembers how to hold that pain together, the harm and the violence no longer needs to carry that message, but love can.
Wow.
Oh, wow, so clear, so beautiful. And yeah, I remember we walked with another community where, they reached out initially, that was many years ago, they reached out and involved the police and the legal system, which probably there was a place and need for that. But they also realized that was very limiting because the police was not going to do the healing work. Prisons, they're based on the same harmful colonial mindset of punishment and isolation and control. From your work, Carly, in prisons, you've done extensive work and research. How do you begin to help someone heal within a system that is harmful? How do you walk this path between, yeah.
Well, certainly when I was doing my PhD and visiting men right across Australia in different prisons in this place we now call Australia, the men that I was sitting with and listening to had been committed to the prison system because of violent crimes. And I wasn't there to judge. I was there to listen, and that's the key. Is just at first just creating spaces where we can truly listen to the person that's sitting alongside us. That was difficult within the prison system because for me to do that within as much safety as I could create, I had to make sure the guards were not in the room. So that took quite a lot of organising, as you can imagine.
Right.
Yeah.
To say, you need to get out. You need to let me sit in here with this person so they can tell their story. So I think it's difficult, but it is possible to create safe enough, not safety, but safe enough spaces for people to begin to be listened to and for them to tell their stories, even within that system. One of the first things that we did, and we're actually taught not to do this because I'm by trade, if you want to call that, a social worker, is you don't share anything of yourself. And I had to unlearn that because when we're talking to mob, when we're talking to our people, we have to create authentic relationships. So what I did is I sat down with them and I had this big poster board that I'd mapped my own family and my own pain within my family and that intergenerational healing journey. And I showed them that and talked to that. And so that was a way of connecting and kind of normalizing, I guess. And then we would sit and we'd then map their story. It was really beautiful, but yeah, I had to share a bit of myself.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be going anywhere and expecting people to share their story unless my story is also part of that full story. So I guess what I'm saying is, these are terrible systems, but even within those systems, we can create safe enough spaces if we're actually really firm about what that looks like within that system to begin that healing journey. And it starts with listening.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And reframe the narrative from you being a criminal to you're a human being who has experienced and carry enormous pain and intergenerational pain.
That's right. And witnessing that and acknowledging that and sitting alongside that. What's really important, which I began this part of the conversation with, is I didn't go in there to judge. I went in there to connect and to listen.
Can I just tell a story around that? What Kelly's
Yeah.
I did 4 weeks for 5 years, every 6 months in Alice Springs prison. And we were doing what I'd call psychodrama. We would have a theme and I would ask the women to act out whatever they wanted to tell me or tell us each other. Anyway, one day we really got into it big time. And next thing, the door burst open and three screws, custodial officers, came into their room with their guns on it, sort of like, like this. And the women froze. And I spun around and said, I'll try not to use the word I used. I said, what the F are you doing walking into my room when I'm working here? Now, this was, I said my room so there's a power thing I just said there. And they went, we thought you were having a right in here. And I said, we are. We're actually looking at ourselves. So it's kind of right as when we start to look deeply at ourselves and realise how we've been made, how we've been constructed to do the things we've done that have brought us into this place. And then I stopped because I was angry. And then I said, now, you've got a couple of choices here. You can either leave or you can put the guns over in the corner and join us and you might learn something. And I was looking out of the corner of my eye to see that the people I were working with, they were frozen. They didn't know what to do. And then the guys, the three custodial officers kind of lowered their guns and they just backed out of the room. But that's not the core of the story. What happened is I turned around. One of I was working with the men actually, sorry, and one of the men from one of the communities I knew started to cry. And you don't do that in front of your mates inside, by the way. He started to cry and then he said something I will never forget, and that's the end of this story. He said, nobody has ever stuck up for me in my life like that before.
Wow.
Oh, holy moly, that's it. And I knew where he came from. Nobody has ever stuck up for me in my life like that before.
Yeah, Mum, I got told time and time again, sort of similar to that, no one has listened to my story. This is the first time I've been able to tell my story in safety.
Yeah.
So healing often begins with truth-telling and listening, right? That would be the first step for any of us.
Yes.
And giving people choices to walk the path they need to walk and take you with them. So I learned not to be dominant when I was working, but to move where people needed me to go, to hear the depth of the pain, the power they had within themselves to do something for themselves. So the stories were so critical.
Yeah.
And that's, Mum, when we start to wear, and this is actually really important, our so-called expertise as an invisible garment, if that makes sense. When you're doing this work, there's kind of no room for expertise in that sense. You have to wear that as an invisible garment so you can connect with that person sitting next to you.
Yeah. And you also often take your work to like systems that are still harmful. They reenact harm. So where do you begin also to address that part of the story of that harm continues to be perpetuated by larger systems in which we are all embedded? And even if you do the tender work of healing, somebody walks out into the world and that's coming back again. The racism, the injustice is. So how do you tend to both the individual, the communal, and then the systemic?
Do you want
Did you want me to answer, Mum, or do you want to answer that?
You've got to be, okay, as soon as you started to talk about that, Prime Minister and Cabinet would invite me to Canberra. I would go to I would be invited to talk to different government organisations. And I've got a couple of stories there. When the Howard government was being constructed and there was all sorts of things happening, I got a call from Canberra one night about 8 o'clock and I was walking up and down my pathway telling them that they couldn't do this. If they did what they said they were going to do for our people, our mob, they were going to create more problems. And I can just remember having this I'll give you his name. His name was Patterson. I won't go on it. I won't give you his first name, but he was adamant they wanted change, but the sense was coming from their power, not how he was going to sit and listen to what was happening and how in communities and how people could change by their support. So there's that part of it. The other part of it is to engage with places where you don't want to be. So another time when I was working in Cape York, I was brought down to Brisbane to a big meeting, and it was full of white males. I don't mean to be rude when I say that. And I sat at the back with a couple of people that I'd been working with in Cape York, and I was as cranky as I've ever been in my life about anything. I was ready to go and punch people out because it was racist the way they were talking about what they might do. And the fellow sitting beside me, who's a really good friend of mine, he's got his hand over and he's just got on my shoulder he's saying, calm down, Judy, calm down, Judy. You know, we'll be all right. And I finally put my hand up and I did speak to it. And suddenly people listened because they could feel not the anger in me, but the distress in me that as they talked, they were negating the people out there in communities on the ground who had been through, these were all artificial communities. They'd been, formed out of colonisation. And, they didn't understand that the pain was still in the communities, still in the stories. And so after I'd calmed down, I was able to tell them some stories of people they had sent into communities who became sexual offenders on children. Now, I've introduced something that's really horrible to talk about, but it was true, that they had sent into communities men who already had a background of harm of women. So these men were powerful in the sense that they were trying, that they wanted power and they wanted to get in our communities. But government didn't understand that. And this was when Joey Bjelke-Petersen was the Premier and Bob Cameron was the Minister. And the fellow sitting beside me just had his hand on my shoulder, quietly kind of saying, calm down, Judy, calm down, Judy. No, don't do this, because I was ready to get up and fight. What am I saying here? Is I learned in that particular session that I could get nowhere if I walked in and lost myself. But if I came in with a strategic plan that I had laid out, that I could walk into the federal government or the state governments, because I was also working in the territory at that time, and I could get them to listen to me. So what I learned, and that's why I'm sitting here talking to you now, is that we have a responsibility to become self-determining in our own right. And we can then engage with government and tell them what we need for ourselves. But we don't have to wait for government. We just get out and do what we need to do. And that's when WELE evolved. Somebody gave it to me. Oh, you're doing WELE. And I said, what's WELE? Fire. You've got the fire in you. You want change. Water. You're willing to walk into the grief and sit with the painful stories and hold them so the other can become inspired, empowered to do their own change. Okay.
And there's another important word too when we talk about our work is instead of just trauma-informed, we talk about trauma-integrated, and that's a really intentional change of words. So what integrated means is, we work on the ground, in the dust with the community, so we're integrating this knowledge into ourselves, and then we're going in to come out, then we come out to family, to community, and this is really important. We got to go further than that, and that's what I like to work in the dust, but also right up to the top, as Mum was saying, whether it's government policies and structures. So then as we come out too within organisations, we want them to embed this knowledge within their organisations, into their policies, into their procedures. So there's sustainability in that. Otherwise, it's just these tick box courses that people are doing.
Right.
And work within research where you're actually constantly chipping away and changing how things are done. But I also want to acknowledge, we talk about, we're trying to change systems and people say, oh, the system's broken, we need to fix it. It's actually not broken. The system is not broken. It's actually working exactly how it was intended to work. And that's the problem. That's the big problem. So it's very difficult to fix something that's actually operating how they intended it to work. And I hope that makes sense. So what we need to do is, in very subtle sometimes and sometimes not so subtle ways, is actually bring in new systems as opposed to trying to fix these colonial systems that aren't working for any humans on this planet. And we're seeing that more and more and more. And Mum's dad, my grandfather, used to talk about this age, and he called it the quickening. He might have had a different word for it. And that's what we're seeing at the moment. There's this sort of slow collapse of those systems. They're not working, and people are waking up to going, really, this is not serving us. This capitalist colonial system is unhealthy for individuals, for families, for communities, and most importantly, our mother, the planet that sustains us, that gives us life, that we are deeply connected with.
Yeah, well, absolutely. This is the times we're living in. It's quickening, it's collapsing, it's cracking. And Gabor Mate says we've accepted something that is not normal for the normal. What is normal is not normal. And then our nervous systems are more intelligent because we carry in our DNA, in our blood memories, much ancient wisdom that is now coming. Judy and Carly, you have also worked in communities outside of Australia, like in other Indigenous, Aboriginal Torres communities. What do you feel like Western psychotherapeutic approaches can learn from Indigenous communities and from ancient healing technologies that have been used for thousands of years?
Yeah, I can start that off, Mum, if that's okay.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. Yep. It's interesting, no matter where I've worked, and I spent some time in Papua New Guinea too, where I actually did my primary school years. And there's similarities I found across all First Nations, Aboriginal communities. And one thing I'm really focused on at the moment too, within the work that we're doing, is actually bringing those ways in instead of people saying, for example, you might be polyvagal theory or whatever theory it is that people are using, and that's science that attached to it, bringing that two-eyed seeing in and actually putting the Indigenous healing practices above, actually, because they're the original healing practices as opposed to some little novelty on the side which people talk about are good. They're really good practices for healing your mob. I'm really focused on saying, well, actually, no, these are human healing practices. And if you take you take wherever you come from as far back as you can remember, you'll find that they were always healing practices. So, much of what the world now calls healing, we've already known, somatic therapy, creative therapy, as I mentioned, polyvagal therapy, nervous system regulation, trauma integration. These aren't foreign to us, because they've always lived in our songs and our dances, our ceremonies, our yarning, weaving, techniques or practices where we're doing things with our hands at the same time. So weaving, there's that kind of bilateral stimulation which takes us from the lizard brain up to the frontal lobe, and then we can regulate, sitting on country, doing things together collectively, crying together, laughing together, being silent together, which sometimes can speak louder than words. Our old people, whether it is here in this place we call Australia or other people, really understood that the body remembers. And it's interesting when I go to conferences and they talk about this stuff, but from that scientific point of view, neuro psychology point of view, and I say, yeah, but we kind of know that. That we understood that rhythm settled the heart, which is why it wasn't just something that we did when someone was hurting or there had been pain. It was part of lifestyle. We understood that story recognizes pain, and we would reenact our stories through corroborees and through ceremony. We knew we had to make sense of it through the body. And we understood that, our safety and our continuing maintenance of being physically, mentally, spiritually healthy was created in relationship. So before there were textbooks, there were corroborees, before there were, I suppose, diagnoses, there were ceremonies. And
Yes.
before there were theories, there was listening.
Wow.
So beautiful.
It's so profound and yet so simple, like so natural. We all feel that, what you're saying. Yes, Judy.
Judy.
Yes.
But what I also want to say, so I was just, as Kelly was talking, I was thinking which countries I've been called into. So first of all, Timor-Leste, and I'm going to talk about that community in a minute, South Africa, New Zealand, obviously Canada and the US, all of those different places. People would say, can you come? So let me go back to Timor. Timor had just come out of a war zone. They said, can you come? And so I went, and it had just been made a country, and they were sorting through all of the things that needed to be done to make it a functioning country, but it had just come out of a war zone. So I got there, and I started to sit and listen to people, and fortunately I had bought some canvas, and I had bought some paints and brushes and things which I carry with me all the time. And I put the canvas down and I said, paint it for me. So 20 people sat around this canvas and started to talk. And as they started to talk, they started to then put on the canvas the things that they wanted as Timor became a self-governing country. And it was profound for me to listen. I might put a few words in here and there, but they were creating the essence of their own country as they created the canvas. Now, there was a lot more in it than that, clearly, but I'm just saying, so what happened, I thought, this is profound. This is amazing. They're kind of focusing down. They're not looking at each other, but they're putting this canvas together, but they're actually creating a structure of a new country. They actually took it to the governing, they knew them because it's a really small country, Timor, and they took it to Horta and showed it to him and said, this is what we need in this country. So what I guess I was saying is that when we give people a chance to actually start to name the pain that they've lived with and seen and they've been through, and one of those women was a woman who, during that insurrection when they were trying to get out of the clutch of the other government, she carried a gun all the time. I mean, a rifle all the time. But she got really excited about thinking, well, okay, we can fight forever, but what do we do when we build our own country up? And so this canvas then became what they talked to all the time. I got called in by the Horta at that time and said, what have you done? And I said, nothing. I just said to them, tell me stories, paint it for me. And they told the stories to themselves that they needed to know and were able to then talk to the senior people who were in Indonesia and other places about what they wanted. So Timor, the canvas. In South Africa, again, when I got called there, we use the canvas, because when people are looking at a canvas with paints and brushes and they start to talk about the pain that is within themselves, that's the first thing, before they talk about the pain that is in the places where they live. They start to be real. They're not looking at each other. They're painting while they share with each other the dreams they have to transform their country. I've done that in New Zealand. I've done them. I say, draw me a story. Tell me a story by making a drawing for me and tell me about it. So the question I ask wherever I go is, what's the story here? What is the bigger story here? If I went to the US at the moment, I'd say the same thing about Trump. What's naughty? What's the biggest story here that this country is willing to give power to this man? Okay, so I'll forget about them over there at the moment. But so what are the stories that we hold in ourselves? Now, I'm being really serious when I say this.
Another thing you always ask too, Mum, apart from what the story is, and what ceremony, cultural practices that are connected to the earth do you have here that you can help? Because you always ask that. What are the cultural practices? What are place-based here that they can then add to that story as a way forward?
Sorry, Judy. Go on.
To the stage when we can start to look at the cultural practices. Yeah. Because my experience is in working in every part of Australia and have been invited to go to South Africa, to New Zealand, to Timor, to PNG, is that people are just embodied within their stories. They don't even know the culture. They don't have a sense that government's going to do something. But as they start to look at themselves and understand the stories that hold them, they start to look out external. But more particularly, if you put a big canvas on the floor and people sit and they start to paint and talk, they're actually then starting to develop the structures that they want to take to government. In Timor, what happened is that community of people 20 of them sat and did this big canvas, and then they took it down to the emerging leaders because they were only just getting self-determination, self-management from the Indonesian mob.
Right.
They took it down to talk to the art that they had done
Begin
as
to
they
reimagine
each other about what they wanted.
Yeah.
And that brings one of the questions I see in chat. They said, for those without Indigenous lineage, Joe McAndrews is asking, for those without Indigenous lineage who are part of the colonizing culture, what do you think we need to do for collective healing when we have lost our collective cultural practices? How do we recreate those practices, as you were saying?
I go into a community. They've asked me to go there. It's a very wealthy community. It's surrounded by cotton farming. Cotton farmers came over from the United States of America. It's surrounded by cattle farming. And the local people feel so disempowered from that. But as they start to engage with each other, and I'm now talking about something very serious, they will start to see that this generation of children are acting out the pain and distress of their parents and their grandparents. I'm talking specifically of this generation of Aboriginal children. And then when you work within that community and they start to talk about working as a 14-year-old child, picking cotton for the cotton farmer who's come over from the United States of America, you start to see that we're connected around the world in the way that we transfer the culture of one place, which was the cotton farmers from the United States of America, to Western New South Wales. And the thinking that has been part of that the chippers will be the blackfellas, will be the people who have been dispossessed, disconnected. And as we sit and talk with each other, and I've been asked to just give a talk to this out there in that particular place as an opening ceremony for something in the next month or so. As we start to talk about that, we come to an understanding we are the only ones that can change our world. And as we change our world, we change other worlds. As I became aware of my husband's pain and distress from growing up in an exclusive English public boarding school, I became aware that I had allowed both of us as parents to transfer our pain onto our children. My daughter is sitting here now. So our children pick up that pain. And if we take that out to the collective, so I'm now looking at a community that lives just near where we live, and people are ringing me all the time at the moment saying, hey, Judy, what do we do about the kids here? They're breaking into shops, they're doing this, they're doing that. They have no sense of law or anything. They have no sense of themselves. They're just angry. What do we do now? And that's happening right this moment in a community about 60 kilometres away from where we live, Kelly and I. What do we do now? And there is an assumption from those kids, and I'm being very serious when I say this, they will feel safer going into the juvenile detention centre where they get a safe bed, 3 meals a day, and they get activities because I've worked in those places. But how do we engage with them on the streets of their town where they're acting out the pain, the distress that's in their hands? You see that Terry's wanting to say something. Terry's got their hand up.
Yeah.
So
bring Terry and Carly.
Terry, I'll just finish this. If you start to work with the children who are really acting out some crazy things, you start to feel and hear and understand the pain in their family. and families. And then when you unpack that further, you're understanding the pain in that community. It's in Australia what I would call a colonised community. The trucks come through. The government services have got conditions on them. When I say the trucks come through, I'm being really serious, and I hope I don't offend anybody. Young people will get on a truck to be paid to do a sexual activity on a driver, get off at the next place because they want money for food. I mean, this is serious. I can show you in this parts of Australia where this is happening. Right. Because there's no food at home. Because their parents, if they've got parents, are putting their money out for drugs, a needle in an arm. This is serious stuff in Australia, and we don't talk about it in the way we should. So therefore, I'm really comfortable sitting with a bunch of kids who will kind of act out. I'm actually hung out. I call it hanging out at the school where all the kids have been sent to or been bad kids. And they're telling me through their behaviour what's happening. And I will join with them and say, okay, well, make a story for me. So they create the story in a theatre. And I say, well, can we turn that around? And then they start to themselves talk about how they can turn that around. I'm talking about Moriko. Just so you know, and I've done it in other places. So the kids themselves, and this is and I'll come to you, Terry, in a minute, Terry Wilkinson. The kids are giving us a challenge through their behaviour. In every part of Australia at this moment, where people are contacting me, they're saying, Judy, what do we do about the kids here? This is what the kids are doing. If you go to Tennant Creek, you'll hear that stuff. If you go to Alice, you'll hear that stuff. If you go to, So the kids are telling us that they're not happy. Something's happened in their life.
They're acting out what the adults have suppressed. They are acting out what has not been healed, what's been suppressed. Let's hear from Terry. Yes. And Carly, do you have anything to add to the question of, like, for those who don't have a culture or are very disconnected, or their culture feels very distant?
Sure. And look, that's a really important, it's a question I get asked a lot. And I suppose it's a remindering to people. And Auntie Miriam Rose that spoke about Dadidi, which is a deep form of listening, is a really good way to kind of explain this. She said, basically, come a bit closer. I've got something to tell you. And so it was an invitation to not just her own mobs and Aboriginal peoples throughout this place we call Australia, but to non-Indigenous people to come back and to listen, to really, I suppose, to a message that's really simple and profound, is that we don't need to invent a new way forward. We just need to remember how to listen to country and each other. And this ancient wisdom is there for everyone, regardless of whether you consider yourself First Nations or not. And a friend of mine recently went back to Ireland, for example, and so he's tracing his generations back to the days where it was very much earth-based. And so every human on this planet can actually take themselves back to when we were human and understood that the country, that this mother that sustains us also gave us meaning and direction. So the invitation is for all humans to actually come back to that way of being within the country. We all have that access. And if people need to use First Nations people as a conduit to get back to that knowing, then that's also an invitation.
Oh, that's what a generosity to speak to that. And beautiful. Yeah. Terry.
Sorry, the alarm before. You can unmute yourself.
Thanks. Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay. I want to thank you all, because everything you've said in the last while has just been so profound for me. And I just wanted to share a bit of what's happening in Canada here, which isn't exactly wonderful. I've been involved in activities to do with Indigenous. I'm not Indigenous by skin, but I am by heart. And I've been working in outreach with a lot of people that are residential school survivors. Now, I learned about the history of residential school survivors from the stories that you're talking about, the people that are walking the streets that have been kicked out of every system and are kind of just there. I've been able to learn from them through their trauma. And I think what I wanted to suggest to people that are asking, how can we non-Indigenous people support this whole thing about reconciliation, which I hate that word because it should be reconciliation. It's not a word, it's an action. So I just think that people should be, or I don't say should, but people can help by meeting people where they're at, not in a judgment way, listening to their stories and finding out what can help with them individually. I think we have to start at the bottom, where I've started, in the ground level, because systems are just effed. I won't say the word, and I agree with you by saying that we can't change the system. But right now we're living in the system, so we have to accommodate it somehow. And the way I do that is I try to advocate through the system for people. So my suggestion would be for people who are non-Indigenous to go into the communities of the Indigenous, just be a friend to someone, just listen, as you say, hear their story, and then help them where they feel they need it. If you want to call it help, it's not really help. It's about walking with them and understanding them. And I really appreciate everything you've said, because in Canada, it's really not a good time right now, and we're losing our hope, because reconciliation did the right thing in the beginning. It allowed people to say their stories. But now there's so much political intervention that there's a lot of denial of what the people have told about the fact that children have been buried and so on. It's all up in the air politically, and it's causing people to go backwards instead of forward. So I wonder if you could comment on, if either of you or any of you could comment on that aspect, and if it's happening in Australia. I know that's a lot, but thank you so much for listening. And yeah, I'm glad to be here, and it's an honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
Do you want me to respond, Carly?
Yeah, go for it, Mum. Oh, you're on mute, though, I think.
Okay. The first thing is that everybody's got stories. And one thing that allowed me to think of that more deeply was when I started to look at the prison hulk sailing into Sydney Cove at 1788. And on the first set of prison hulks that sailed into Sydney Cove at 1788, they imported the problems of what we call Merry England to Australia. There was a 10-year-old boy on that prison hulk, and he had been found to be a convict because he was orphaned and living on the streets of London, and he stole some bread. So he was sent to Australia. Now, obviously, it's much more complex than that. There were other people coming out and things like that. But I use that as an example because the 10-year-old boy, the 10-year-old girl, the kids that I engage with when I'm out in community have all got stories. And I say to them, I'll go to a place and I'll say, make me a story. And they'll get together and they'll start to create a story, and then they'll put it on, and I'll ask them, hey, could we put that on? If I get some food together and we have our families come together, would you put that on as a play? Or would you make me a story on canvas where they paint? So I'm asking the kids to tell me what their life is like. And you know, as I sit and listen, I generally hear them create the answers to some of their stories. On the other hand, and I'm now talking specifically about where I live, I actually sat with a group of kids from a place not in Lismore but further down, who started to tell us about a particular person in the education system who was not a good person in the way that that man was behaving sexually on kids. But it was the kids who started to tell the truth-telling. And for me, and I'm using the for me as a responsibility, but for us as a collective, we then have to respond in some way to the needs of those children. And it may be that we do some painting, it may be that we do some excursions like taking kids out into country, it may be that we then decide to go and talk to, and so now I'm talking about something serious, who are my friends in the police force who will follow this through? Who are my friends in the department, in a government department, who will follow this through? So I have a small group of friends that I can actually get in serious situations where I can ring up and say, rightio, I will respond by telling people in authority that this particular principal of a school is a serial sexual offender on kids. I'm being serious here. Or something else is happening. The drugs are coming through here or whatever. So it's a responsibility for us to actually make choices about how we're going to respond to the harder stories that we hear. While, and Kelly would know this because she does this through WLE too, we take people out into country. Just recently, my nephew, who was a police officer, decided to lead the police force and to take kids out canoeing. And it's amazing. You think it's a canoe trip, but it's amazing how you give power and presence to the young people who may be on that canoe trip as well. Kelly, I don't know if you want to talk about that canoe trip we all did and how much it brought us together. What I'm saying is not only that I've talked about kids here and what we do, but we also need to look after ourselves. Because look at my face. I'm an old woman and I'm tired. And I've been doing this for a damn long time. And I feel so much better, so much more empowered that I have friends like you sitting there asking these questions, that my daughter is doing the work she's doing. So we need to come together as well. And so this is such an important conversation we're having. Okay.
Oh,
Thank you, Judy and Carly. If you have anything to add to Terry's question, and we also have come to the end of our time, so if you want to add something, and we can carry some of the questions to the next conversation as well. This is kind of will be flowing into the conversation with Jambi and Kylie next.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to circle back to Terry, if you had to put in just one small sentence your question, because there was a lot there, and I just want to, if I can just really quickly answer the bit that stands out for you the most.
I have to unmute.
Yeah, I'm listening.
Hi, am I unmuted now?
No,
yes.
you're fine. Talk.
Yeah, it's hard to put it into one question because so many things have been running through since I've listened to you speak. But I guess the one thing would be how is it in Australia as opposed to what's happening here with the people not believing stories? They're trying to take back from the people that have shared their stories and pretend it didn't happen, or they're just making it up. There's a lot of denial here. And I just wonder, like, how do you, if you have that in Australia, how do you deal with it as communities? I guess that's my biggest question.
How do you deal with denial?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely the same happens here. How do we deal with it? The same as we've always dealt with it, gently, slowly, retelling.
Truth telling. Yeah.
Add to that, Kelly, what you did and what Dave did was set up the formal structure of WLE. So now it is a sovereign business. So the work of healing in WLE has become a sovereign business, and Carly and Dave employ people, and they're our friends actually, who go out and do similar work. And I'm talking and thinking of people that are sitting here like Kylie, for example. Yeah. So I'm going to be quiet because Kylie has said she's got a story as well.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Judy, Carly, thank you so much for this time together, for your wisdom, for Judy, for your warrior spirit, for carrying this incredible medicine for so long. And I know probably at the beginning you're very much alone. You were the very few people were seeing trauma the way you did see it already back then. Now we're catching up with you 30 years later. So thank you both for sharing so much wisdom and for your support with the film and guidance. And we'll continue being in
And
conversation.
thank you for all you do and represent. I mean, you represent the change, and especially seeing mom and daughter together doing this work is so refreshing. It's so, if this is not a success story, I don't know what is. It's such a joy and an honor to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you for having us, and thank you for every one of you that that dialed in. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I make a suggestion? Thank you. There are stories that are coming from others in this group, and I'm wondering whether we could create the possibility of those stories coming together. For example, Kylie, there's people who want to share as well, but is this the possibility of a book or some books?
Of what?
Of a book.
Of a book. Oh.
We're talking to each other, but how about we kind of keep our connections going? And it may be that those stories will grow if they're also published.
Yeah.
And I know that the world is needing something at the moment. Kelly will tell you that we can't keep up with Trauma Trails, which was the book that came out of, and the stories are out of my work. But I think there's quite a few people here who could share and so educate us, inform us how we could do things together
Just so
and
you
better.
know, Kylie and Jambi are on next. They've got another hour of them just talking. So she'll be telling her story.
And
Yeah,
you just planted a seed, Judy. You just planted a seed that we will tend to and see if it wants to grow and take the shape of a book. That sounds like
Another.
or some yes. Deep gratitude to both of you. We'll take 10 minutes break and we'll be five. Okay, 5. And we'll be back with Jambi and Kylie. And please bring your questions. We'll continue this conversation.